to make the world a better place in terms of the separation of money and state. And my personal motivation was to make a contribution towards the adoption of Bitcoin, to show that this is possible, that it's not actually that complicated. You know, if people in a township environment can use Bitcoin, then just about anyone else can also use it. You're never going to pull yourself out of poverty because of a government handout. If anything, you'll stay in poverty and develop a relationship of dependency.
Herman, nice to meet you, man. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, dude, nice to meet you, dude.
Just for the people that have never heard of Bitcoin Ekasi, would you be able to just give us a bit of your background and then how the project started and why it started?
I mean, basically what it is, it's building a circular economy, Bitcoin circular economy. And the reason we started that, I guess, is twofold. My personal motivation was to contribute something to the adoption of Bitcoin. And so I've been involved. Well, I say involved. I've been learning about it since very early on, which is starting around 2013. And we used it in our business for cross-border payments, which is an unrelated business in tourism, starting in 2015. So I was very familiar with the technology, and I used it, and I could see the benefit it could have if it saw mass adoption, to make the world a better place in terms of the separation of money and state, which might not make a lot of sense if you're not into Austrian economics or Bitcoin in general, but the people who are into that stuff would understand what it means. So I wanted to make a contribution, and I didn't know what to do. And the idea for Bitcoin Ekasi came up in 2019 when I saw a similar project emerge in El Salvador. And what they were doing was essentially paying salaries in Bitcoin and then, onboarding shops so that the staff that they were paying could spend their salaries. And that's basically what we did. We took that idea and we copied it. And starting in 2021, we started paying staff salaries for a charity NPO project that I've been running for several years. The charity still does the same thing. Nothing much has changed, except we started paying staff salaries in Bitcoin rather than paying those salaries in rands. And we then onboarded shops so that they could spend their salaries without converting to Bitcoin. And my personal motivation was to make a contribution towards the adoption of Bitcoin, to show that this is possible, that it's not actually that complicated. You know, if people in a township environment can use Bitcoin, then just about anyone else can also use it. There's no reason for anyone not to adopt it if it works in those type and that kind of environment, which is obviously a very challenging environment. But I mean, also I've been working in that particular township for many years. And by now it's been 15 years that I've been involved in that township community. And another motivation was to really try and do something that would sort of tip the scales, because after 10 years of running the charity project, I realized that, basically what we're doing is putting a Band-Aid on an amputation, and unless there's more fundamental change in society, we can't really expect to see much change. You really got to, if you really want to change things, you kind of have to start from the foundations. And so, and we've seen this benefit in the lives of people who have started saving in Bitcoin, people who have never had access to a savings technology before because they don't have proof of residence, they don't have the proper documentation. Whatever they do is done in cash. And so if you give them a Bitcoin wallet and you teach them how to use Bitcoin, they do inevitably start saving in Bitcoin. And that's for most of them the first time they'd ever considered saving for the future. And this has been ongoing for about 4 years by now. So you can imagine, if you've kept track of the Bitcoin price over the last 4 years and you imagine yourself saving in Bitcoin over the last 4 years, you can imagine what changes in your personal life you would have experienced. And so those are the two main motivations. My personal motivation was to do something to forward the adoption, but then also obviously to do something to help this community where I've invested so much of my time.
Yeah. No, man, it sounds awesome. So you've mentioned the financial inclusion aspect of Bitcoin. So maybe also talk to us about I saw a presentation that you did where you were essentially discussing how after the great financial crisis in 2008-2009, governments were printing a whole bunch of money, and that was eroding people's purchasing power. And you saw Bitcoin as a kind of antidote. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
I mean, that's kind of the whole conversation around sound money, right? And how if you, I mean, I just started listening to Lawrence Lepard's book last night. I bought the audiobook yesterday. It's a new book called The Big Print. And it's a very familiar topic if you've been following Bitcoin for a long time, but he phrases it in a kind of a new, slightly easier to understand way. But basically, what it comes down to, the thesis is that, governments basically spend beyond their means, and so they're able to do that because they can borrow almost infinitely. Especially a government like the US, where there's such a huge demand for dollars around the world. And so what countries would do is they would buy and hold US debt, as a reserve, as a type of foreign reserve. And so what the system does, not only in the US but more generally, is that it allows governments to borrow beyond their means, which then puts them in a situation where they've got to make some very, very difficult choices. And it's a choice that we now face in South Africa as well. Well, not we, our government
Mm.
faces this choice in South Africa as well, where we've borrowed to the extent where there's not much room left to borrow, because when we keep borrowing and keep borrowing, eventually the borrowing costs become too high. You run out of people that are willing to lend you money, because it becomes obvious that you're never going to be able to pay it back. Now, it's hard to say who's closer to that point, but most countries are far closer to that point than what you'd like to be. And so eventually you're going to run out of borrowers, which then puts the government in a position where ending, which is very, very unpopular. It's political suicide. Or they can do what most governments have tended to do across time, which is again and again, they choose to devalue the currency and essentially inflate away the value of the debt. So 100 Rand that they borrowed a year ago is no longer worth 100 Rand today, not in purchasing not in terms of purchasing power, and yet they still only have to pay back 100 Rand. So if they inflate away the value of the money, they inflate away the value of the debt. And that's a very, very attractive solution. And it's something that only governments can do. And it's kind of unfair because you and I have to work, for the same money that they basically print out of thin air. And it just sort of, it tips the scale in favor of irresponsible spending on the part of the government. And so what a sound money would do is it would essentially force governments to become more accountable, towards its citizenry, not because of democracy or elections, but because we would all live on the same monetary standard. And so it would force governments to be as accountable as we are, because it would force them to take reckoning of the fact that they could in fact run out of money. At the moment, they can't really run out of money because they can print it and then they can inflate the value of the debt. On a sound money standard, as kind of used to be the case for most of history, that becomes more difficult. Not impossible, but it does become more difficult. And so I can see a much more positive world where governments don't have that power to print money. It doesn't solve all our problems, but it begins to solve them at a very, very fundamental level. And I'm not the best person to explain that, actually. I've spent years and years reading about this stuff, and I still struggle to phrase it as well as some other people do. But the book I just mentioned, Lawrence Lepard, that's a great start. Lynn Alden also has a great book on this called Broken Money. There are many people out there that can explain this a lot better than I can. All I've done is to try and build a project that demonstrates, okay, if you buy into that thesis, what next? What then? So I've read the books, I understand Bitcoin. How do I now go about adopting it in real life? Well, that's where we come in, and that's where our project can sort of serve as a demonstration for how you can actually put this into practice.
Yeah. No, but you've explained it quite well. But so tell us about the actual area. So you said it's a little town in Mossel Bay, right? Explain to us maybe how that community has benefited from Bitcoin.
So it's a very particular part of the township outside of Mossel Bay. So Mossel Bay is has a population of about 100,000 people. So it's not a large city. It's one of the bigger coastal towns in the Western Cape. Um, it's probably the second largest town in this area, other than George. Um, so we focused on a very particular part of the township, not the entire township, a very particular part of it. And it's the same part of the township where we've been operating for many years. So in 2010, my wife and I started a surfing charity in a small part of the Mossel Bay Township. We essentially chose that particular location because we could get kids to walk up and down to the beach and back. So we didn't have to rely on transport to get them to come to the beach and practice surfing. And so there's very practical reasons for why we chose that part of the township. And so that's also where the Bitcoin project is based. That's where our staff are from, the surf coaches, the lifeguards, the teachers, the cooks, the groundsmen. We recruit all our staff from that particular township. And then also the kids that attend the surfing program. And so it's an area of, I'd say, roughly 5 to 10,000 people that we sort of operate within. We don't extend our reach beyond that because you can't scale a project like this to hundreds of thousands of people. When you're trying to introduce a new form of money, it's best you stay focused on a very small area because it's a very time intensive effort to try and educate people on what this new money is and how to use it. And we simply do it as an example. Our aim is not to replicate what we've done elsewhere. Our aim is to encourage other people to copy and paste what we've done. But our efforts will remain squarely focused on that particular township. And so the benefit to locals have been, primarily to the staff, but then also as a second order effect to the spaza shops that have adopted Bitcoin as a form of payment, because they've been accepting Bitcoin as payment from our coaches since 2021. So it's been more than 4 years. And so we've gone through the entire bear market where, the Bitcoin price was as low as, I think at one point it reached just below 300,000 Rand Bitcoin, whereas at the moment, after this recent crash, it's at around 1.5 million Rand. And it very recently was up above 2 million Rand per Bitcoin. So, but let's say at the current level of about 1.5 million Rand, from the bottom of the bear market in 2022, that's a five times increase. So that's a 500% growth in value. And so we have many staff. I mean, we pay 22 salaries in Bitcoin, and there's about 38 businesses, spaza shops in the township that accept Bitcoin as payment. So we've calculated that estimated that there's around anything between 300 and 500 people that use Bitcoin on a regular basis. Now, not all of them are saving in Bitcoin, but many of them are. And so the ones that have been saving in Bitcoin, whatever amount of money they've saved has increased, more or less 5x over the last, 3 to 4 years. And so, let's say, for example, I mean, I know for a fact that there are several of our coaches that have saved meaningful amounts of money in Bitcoin. Their lives have changed in a material sense because of good decisions that they've made. It's not a handout. They work hard, they earn a salary, and they can choose to spend or save that salary. And because they've chosen to save, they've benefited from the price increase in Bitcoin. But even those people that have not saved big amounts of money and have saved small amounts of money, it's perhaps the most effective way to demonstrate to a person the value of saving in hard assets to begin. Like, this is how you change your future. Like, government handouts are never going to do it. You're never going to pull yourself out of poverty because of a government handout. If anything, you'll stay in poverty and develop a relationship of dependency. And to a large extent, that's what the government wants. They want people to be dependent because then you can manipulate people. But if you really want to empower yourself, the way to do it is to accumulate capital and save for the future. And so what better way to teach a person that lesson than to show them how certain types of value, or how value stored in certain types of assets, can increase over time. And because Bitcoin is so accessible, I mean, you can literally give somebody a wallet within minutes. There's no paperwork required. There's no queues. There's no frustrating banking apps that don't work because they can't scan your face, or you haven't got a permanent residence or whatever. It's a matter of minutes. And even if you don't have a smartphone, there's apps that work on feature phones. Even if you don't have a feature phone, we basically built our own bank cards using open source technology. We've banked 50 to 60 kids using bolt card in with NFC technology that runs on infrastructure that we control 100%. So it's super accessible, and it's perhaps the most powerful way to demonstrate to a person, this is how you change your future. Do whatever you can to accumulate whatever capital you can and build from there.
Yeah. Sounds awesome, man. And then how did you can you talk to us about some of the challenges that you faced when you tried to introduce this project? So things like getting people to understand what Bitcoin is, how it works, and actually building trust, trusting Bitcoin, and that it can be used as a store of value and a medium of exchange.
I mean, I think it's an interesting question, and I think people would do well to ask themselves that question more often, because really, if you think about that question very carefully, you'd very quickly come to the realization that we are using Google Meet right now, and I think hundreds of other people are using Google Meet right this very minute, and perhaps thousands of people will use it today, and how many people will use it this week? Perhaps millions. How many of those people understand how Google Meet works? Very few.
Yeah.
Where are the servers located? What sort of data encryption is used, et cetera, et cetera. All we do is we press a button and we know it works. And because we've used it so many times, we've come to rely on it. And so Bitcoin is this very new thing, and there is a lot that you can understand about it. And I've dedicated a large part of my time and energy and my mental capacity towards trying to understand how it works. And I think it's important that you do that if you have the capacity to do that. But most people won't have to do that. Um, Most people will only need to be shown how to use the basics of the system. And if they use it often enough, they will come to trust it, they'll come to rely on it, and they will benefit from it. The same way that me and you are using Google Meet right now, and I've never made the effort to understand exactly how Google Meet works. I don't know where their servers are located. I don't know what encryption they use, but I know what button to press, and I'm benefiting from it because I'm able to have a conversation with you. And so we focus on practical demonstration. Like we will go to a person and we'll show them how to buy airtime with Bitcoin. We'll show them how to use the wallet, but we're not gonna try and explain the intricacies of proof of work mining and blockchain technology and difficulty adjustments and public-private key generation and that sort of stuff. It's a very small part of the population that will ultimately benefit from understanding those things. And I think it's important that we teach those things to as many people as possible. Anybody that shows interest should be given the opportunity to learn to understand those things. But the reality is that most people don't need to understand that to benefit from it. So there has been massive challenges. I mean, we often deal with a lot of people that, it's hard to believe, but a lot of people only ever use cash, and so they learn to understand the value of money by looking at the pictures on the notes and the coins, and they don't actually understand how to read numbers. And so now you're dealing with a new currency where there is no physical depiction. There's no lion, there's no cheetah, there's no elephant, there's no rhino. So the value of money is now solely dependent on the numbers on the screen, and so all of a sudden it becomes a lot more difficult, especially for somebody who's never used digital banking. You can imagine what that's like. So those are some of the challenges. And that's why I say it's a very labor intensive thing. Like it's very intense effort in terms of human resources. We're not going to scale to hundreds of thousands of people because realistically we need one support staff member for every 20 or 30 people we're on board, because they might call them in the middle of the night and panic because they think they've lost their wallet. If all that's happened is maybe the Google App Store has made an automatic update or something, and you just need to restore the account or whatever.
Mm.
Um, so those are some of the challenges, and there's many more. Other than the typical challenges that you would find in every South African township, we know what those are, and that sort of ties in. Like you kind of need to address you can't expect somebody to want to understand better money if they're hungry and they don't have a place to live. So, you kind of need to start with those basics first. Where I guess it helps that we built on an existing nonprofit, so we have a footprint in that township community. We've built up trust through our coaches and staff members. They've been working with that community for many years, and so we have addressed many of those basic needs. And so it was kind of just an easy progression to now introduce a new type of money. We didn't have to earn their basic trust, because I mean we have been feeding their children for years. We have helped out with medical issues on many, many, many occasions. So I think those are one of the big, if you're going to start one of these projects from scratch, that would probably be the biggest challenge. It's like people might not say it outright, but the obvious question is, hey, look, like, why are you trying to teach me about this stuff? I don't even have anything to eat. So let's start there.
Yeah. Nah, definitely. I agree. I hear you. Do you think that Bitcoin scales to to become a national kind of reserve asset? So I've spoken to this. I've spoken to different people about this. Where I've suggested that South Africa adopts Bitcoin as a reserve asset purely for the price appreciation part, but then also it has some added benefits as well. It generally just kind of shows technological competence, financial strength, and competence as well. Do you think Bitcoin scales to the national level, and do you think it affects our kind of monetary policy here, where you spoke about ocean economics? Do you think it kind of affects the way that our monetary system is governed in South Africa?
I mean, yeah, that's sure. That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think it eventually will. Inevitably, it will. Money is kind of a zero-sum game where you can see over the course of history, people have used all kinds of things for money: salt, copper, certain types of shells and stones. But ultimately, everybody gravitated towards the best money, which was gold. And so money is kind of this thing where the winner takes all. And it's a very artificial situation where we have all these different national currencies. And it's artificial because it only exists because of government regulations that are specific to a particular jurisdiction, capital controls, currency controls, whatever the case may be. If you removed all of that, what would end up happening naturally was that people would probably gravitate towards the one single best form of money, and all other types of money would lose value. So with Bitcoin being outside the control of governments, the more people learn to trust it, the more you would probably see people abandon their national fiat currencies in favor of Bitcoin. And those governments that are sort of clever, I guess, would adopt it earlier. And, then those ones that aren't so clever will probably wait and, hang on to what they have rather than to adopt it. But I mean, to be honest, I don't see many governments making that right decision, because I think the very structure of government lends itself towards corruption. You tend to have people who want power are typically those who will also want to abuse it. The ones who don't want to abuse power typically don't seek it out. And so it's kind of like a flaw of human nature where you're almost never going to end up with the right people in government, because the right people are not interested in governing. With rare exceptions, obviously, there are obviously exceptions to this, and we've got examples of that in our own recent history, where the right people do end up in government. But for the most part, the people who end up at the top are corrupt, and that's something that you see across the board all over. I mean, what happened in the US with the whole Bitcoin strategic reserve, everybody got very excited about that. And then 2 days later, they launched the ultimate shitcoin, which is Trump coin. And it's the same thing all over again. So I don't know if there's many countries that will really adopt this at a national level as a strategic reserve asset for the country. I think companies will do it and individuals will do it. And ultimately, it'll force governments to do it, but not because they want to. So who knows? I mean, there are governments who own a hell of a lot of Bitcoin. I mean, the US government owns hundreds of thousands of coins that were confiscated.
Yeah.
And there are other governments that own that too, but it's questionable whether they will hold on to it or apply it in the right way or not. They might even end up losing it because they don't know how to deal with it. They might be forced to sell it, like Germany was forced to sell it because of their own laws and regulations. So I don't know. I don't spend too much time thinking about that. Most of my time I spend thinking about how can I get Bitcoin into into the hands of as many people on the ground as possible. I'd rather see individuals and small businesses own Bitcoin long before governments choose to adopt it. And so most of my time is spent thinking about that. But I think ultimately, of course, they will, because ultimately they probably won't have a choice because the currency that they issue will end up becoming worthless, relative to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I think projects like yours and also other examples like El Salvador, for example, and different, similar Bitcoin circular economy projects will get louder. Those that type of thinking will expand, and then eventually they'll have no choice but to seriously consider Bitcoin and actually try to make things better for everyone else. So, what's the end goal with Bitcoin Ekasi? When do you, at some point, maybe down 5, 10 years down the line, and you look back at what you guys have been doing, like what are the boxes that you need to have ticked, or what are the things that make you say that okay, this has been a success?
Um, I mean, it's funny because I think maybe this question actually ties back to the previous one because I do wish for an ideal world where, because we are at a stage in South Africa where things are changing. We've had the ANC government for the last 30 years. I'm old enough to remember the change from apartheid to democracy. And in 30 years' time, we've seen a lot of promise, but we've also seen a lot of broken promises, and we've seen a huge amount of corruption and just theft. And so it kind of feels like South Africa is kind of at a turning point. Um, and I kind of feel like the transition to democracy that started in 1994 is only really going to be fully realized once we see what comes next. And if we as a country can make a peaceful transition into whatever democratic government comes next, um, and I think that is when we actually enter a real democratic situation. Because I'm not sure that what the ANC has done over the last, well, not what the ANC has done, but what has happened in the country with the ANC having such a huge amount of power can really be described as a democracy. It is democratic, of course, because people are allowed to vote, and thank God that we still have all our democratic rights intact. Because of what often happens in other countries where people are liberated by a liberation movement from colonial powers is that the liberation movement itself then turns into a very authoritarian regime, like what happened in Zimbabwe, what is happening in Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, so many other African countries. So I kind of feel like whatever comes after ANC domination is going to be the real democratic South Africa. And I do have hope that what we're doing can play a small role in convincing whoever comes to power next to make better decisions.
Mm.
And perhaps a part of that decision is a reckoning with the reality that Bitcoin is now something that exists in the world and it's not going to go away. Now, that might not mean the government is going to adopt it as a strategic reserve asset, but what it could mean, for example, is which I think would be very beneficial. And if I ever get this opportunity, I would highly recommend that, the powers that be or the powers to come consider this, which is to say, well, let's eliminate capital gains tax on Bitcoin transactions below a certain value, because what that'll do is it'll encourage people to use this new form of money. And what I've seen with what we've done is once you encourage people to use this new form of money, they are also encouraged to start saving in it naturally. It happens almost by itself, because all of a sudden you give them one currency that is over the long term constantly appreciating in value relative to the currency that they're used to, which is constantly losing value when measured against anything else. You can measure the South African rand against anything you want to measure it. It's going to lose value over time. And you can measure Bitcoin against anything you want to measure it, and it's going to gain value over time. So it's not a stretch of the imagination to understand why, when you give somebody an open choice between these two, they will eventually start choosing to save and accumulate value in the better one. And that's only going to become easier and more likely if government encourages the grassroots adoption of Bitcoin. And one way to do that would be to say, look, let's just eliminate capital gains tax on certain amounts of Bitcoin below a certain value. Not when somebody buys a house, maybe, but when you're gonna, when you pay for breakfast at Wimpy, for example, or whatever the case may be, or if you adopt Bitcoin as a small business, imagine how empowering it'll be to see all kinds of small businesses in this country stacking sats and saving in Bitcoin, because it's no longer a thing that they have to worry about in terms of tax reporting to SARS. They're not afraid of going to jail because they're being accused of avoiding taxes. I mean, things like that. I hope that what we can accomplish with our project is to inspire, future leaders to think about that. But other than that, I think the more realistic goal for us is just to carry the message to as many people as possible, and to make people ask questions. There's all these misconceptions about Bitcoin. There's all kinds of, ideas about it, which are sort of propagated without any real substance behind it. And it's so often that I see people visit our project in person and they walk away with a whole new sort of willingness to question their assumptions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Thanks a lot for doing this, man. So where can we send people to find out more about your project, and maybe if people want to donate as well, help out, how can we do that?
I mean, we've got a website. You can go to bitcoinekasi.com. That's Bitcoin ekasi.com, and from there just follow the link to donate, which is in the top menu. Otherwise, we're on X at Bitcoin Ekasi. That's our main platform. We do have a Facebook page and an Instagram profile, but most of the stuff we post is on X. And there's an email form on the website. If people want to get in touch, they can send an email through the website. And I typically, if I don't reply straight away, I will reply in time. But the best thing to do, before you even consider donating or contacting us with questions, I think the best thing, and I know this is difficult, but the best thing to do is to come and visit and to see what it looks like in real life. Because that's the only way to really verify for yourself that what is going on is legitimate. It's not a fake effort. It's not hype. Because that's the one very unfortunate thing about Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin has this little irritating sibling on its shoulder, which is crypto. And there's so many scams and so much hype. And there's people that are constantly trying to associate their crypto project with Bitcoin and trying to ride on the coattails of Bitcoin success, where there is no comparison between the two, because you cannot repeat the process of decentralization. It happened once, and it's probably never going to happen again because of human nature. And we have this thing called Bitcoin, which is properly decentralized and not under anyone's control. But now we've got all this crypto nonsense that is sort of riding along with it. And there's a lot of hype around it. And when I meet people that are not enthusiastic about what we do and that they are skeptical about what we do, I actually think that's a more healthy attitude. I am very, very skeptical when people are overly enthusiastic about what we do, because more often than not, those are crypto people who actually just want to exploit what we do to try and get people to buy into their crypto project. And it's going to take some time before the hype is separated from that which is real. I mean, the internet went through something very similar. I don't know if you remember the dot-com bubble, but that's kind of the phase that we're in now. The internet is hugely beneficial and it's so useful. But back when the internet first became a real thing in people's lives, you could buy a website domain without having a business, and all of a sudden you would have a company valuation of millions of dollars just because you own the right domain. We're kind of in that phase of Bitcoin adoption right now, where there's all these hyped up ideas, but the thing that's real is not quite obvious yet. And we will get there. We will get there. Today, the internet is no longer like that. It's now become ubiquitous, and the real value is now better understood. Whereas there was still a lot of confusion in the late 90s about what is real and what is not. And so I think visiting our project is the most impactful thing that you can do for yourself and for us, because that's the way to verify that what's happening is real.
Yeah. Oh, awesome, man. Thanks a lot for doing this again, eh?
Cool, man. It's only a pleasure. I really enjoy talking to people about it. Thank you.